Let's take a look at some information and charts on Tron for Brave New Coin. This is a coin I've never covered for Brave New Coin, kind of on purpose. In an attempt to stay objective, I'm going to avoid discussing many things about Tron, but it was a coin that was ICO'd in 2017, launched in 2018. Similar to ETH in many ways, virtual machine compatible, has Tether. I'm going to talk about that in depth. They are delegated proof of stake with rotating super representatives, and they promise a high throughput, transaction-wise, low fees, that sort of rigmarole. We can look at the representatives here for Tron, see a few exchanges, a few interesting names here. Obviously, this is Justin Sun's coin, closely related to Huobi, Binance, bought BitTorrent. I mean, there's too many PR topics to discuss in one 10-minute video, but as much as I have heard about Tron previously, years, maybe a year or two ago, I certainly hear less and less about Tron recently. Maybe that's my own bubble. Justin Sun buying Poloniex, Justin Sun bidding on XYZ thing, NFT, the list goes on and on and on. I hear less about that recently, but these are the governing bodies of a consensus mechanism. Here are the voting percentages. We can argue that this is or isn't a certain degree of centralization. Ant group showing up here as well. Another Chinese investor or investment group. But your degree of decentralization may be different than mine. My scale might be completely different. But when I see a large contingent of things owned by Justin Sun or things that are buddy-buddy with Justin Sun, to me, that isn't a high degree of centralization. When a coin hangs its hat on the identity of an individual or the activities of an individual, whether it be a Vitalik or Satoshi or whoever, to me, that is not something I want in a decentralized product. We can talk about Andre, we can talk about anybody in DeFi, we can talk about all the people in sushi, right? If we're truly decentralized, sure, there are devs that do stuff and things that are important and should get paid. But if we're decentralized, we shouldn't be focusing on what one dev or one head PR person is doing all the time. And that's certainly what, for me, in the past has felt like with Tron. It's always about one person. It's not about what's going on with Tron or the dApps or anything else. These are the parameters that they can modify. Pretty standard stuff for proof of stake, right? It's not groundbreaking by any means. It's not Avalanche. It's not Solana, right? And Solana is the same with Alameda and Sam, right? I don't want to hear about any VC. I don't want to hear about any exchange owner. These are all people. They do stuff and things. I get it. But if we're talking about decentralization, it should not matter. It just shouldn't. We don't need a cheerleader if we're truly decentralized. Here are the dApps listed on DeFi Llama. I realize this is probably not the complete list, but this is what they have. Some of these are swaps. Some of these are lending, stablecoins. Again, when we're using one person's name here, I just don't get the best vibe for these products. Maybe that's just me. TVL declining slightly here over the past few weeks. Not exclusive to Tron. This is happening across all of DeFi. And I'm sure they have NFTs and they have all sorts of stuff that BSC or any other chain has. I'm sure it's on Tron. They also have a wallet, which I had no idea that this was a thing, but they do have a browser extension similar to MetaMask for Chrome and Firefox, which is pretty cool. Now, these wallets, MetaMask included, aren't necessarily super secure, but they do help people use them and get onboarded and get connected with dApps when they want to very easily. Most people, at the end of the day, don't care about security. They just don't. That's just how it is. That's why most people use MetaMask in their browser. Most people don't have a hardware wallet, and they never will. And you know what? That's okay. Is it the most secure thing in the world? No. Is it the way things should be? Definitely not. But in order to get people connected, large part of that is stuff like MetaMask and TronLink and whatever ADA might have and whatever AVEX and Solana have. We need stuff like this, whether people want to admit that or not. This is dApp Radar. And again, we can look at all these dApps and say, are these just gambling? What are they? Are they anything related to DeFi at all? Do people use these things? What's the volume per month? What are the users per month? And it's pretty clear that this doesn't quite compare to, ETH or some of this other stuff. When we have hundreds of thousands of users per month billions in volume per month, multiple billions in volume per month, versus EOS or Tron or any of these older chains that just haven't really caught on for whatever reason. No matter how I try to look at this for EOS or Tron or Waves, right? There are always going to be diehard fanatics communities surrounding this stuff, but it just thus far has been unable, Tezos has been unable to capture volume users that ETH has for whatever reason. That's not to say it can't happen in the future. Not saying it's impossible. Just this is the state of things. So until you start to see upticks in devs, dApps, users, volume on Tron, NFTs, right? Anything. It's hard to think of it as a competitive platform against ETH. Looking at transaction counts for Tron, they're certainly up over the past few years in multiple millions now. Kind of resemble EOS a little bit, sitting here at 3 million, rising and falling over the past couple months. Obviously, if you're bullish, you want transaction activity, on-chain activity rising. So you don't want declining anything on-chain activity-wise. You can also look at TronScan for similar data. I really like to look at multiple sources because I trust coin metrics always first, but it's always interesting what TronScan or EtherScan or BSC scan is pulling for data. And the transaction activity does match what Coinmetrics does. They also have triggered smart contracts on here as well, which are flat and have been declining or have declined over the past few weeks. Staking, unstaking would be another one interesting to look at. How much supply is being locked or unlocked at any given time. Not exactly sure what this is measuring here, but that's something you're going to want to look at is what percentage of the supply is sloshing around. How does that relate to price? If you look at active addresses since July 2020, these have really taken off. And I think this partially correlates with, so if we look at, this is Tether on Tron. And for me, when I think of Tron, it's synonymous with Tether now. This is transaction counts of Omni Tether, ETH Tether, and Tron Tether. And this July active address count on Tron corresponds with the transaction count rise in Tether. And if we look at Tron today, the top everything on Tron is Tether, which is fine. Tether's a stable coin. I didn't even realize Tron had USDC too. I can't separate that out, unfortunately, but they have Tether on Tron. It's a massive, massive piece. This is transactions per day at almost 1 million, so almost a third of all transactional activity on Tron is Tether currently. And any of the rises in the metrics have mainly been Tron related or Tether related from what I can tell. So a large percentage of that is definitely Tether. And if we look at active accounts, just kind of flat here. If we zoom in a little bit, certainly down since July. Not super turbo ultra bear or anything, but they're not rising, right? Up until July, you had a rising activity level from the beginning of the year. Certainly not the case now. And if we look at, again, supply on ETH, Tron, and Omni for Tether, Tether has basically in lockstep with ETH and Tron are in lockstep with the Tether supply, which was surprising to me. I knew it was high. I didn't realize it was this high. And if we look at market share, 48% Tron, 50% ETH. Now it makes sense why you'd choose Tron over Tether for ETH transactions. It makes sense why you'd use Tron over ETH for Tether transactions because Tron is much cheaper than ETH per transaction. And let me see if I can just pull that up real quick. I hope they have this data, but I'm assuming it's a fraction of, no, they don't. So it's either 0 or it's a fraction of what ETH would be. Not exactly sure the pricing on transaction counts here, but that's another problem with looking at any coin that has feeless transactions. You're going to see multiple millions. This is EOS all over again. You're going to see multiple millions in transaction count data. You almost need that spam filter where fees need to be high to a point to ward off spam, but they can't be too high where they're discouraging transactional activity. So from a fundamental perspective, for me, Tron is mostly Tether. They ICO'd in 2017. They existed since 2018. Tons of PR stuff. And right now, 30% of it or more is Tether. I'll let that lead you to your own conclusions, but I'd expect certainly more out of a chain if it's going to be competitive with AVAX or Solana or any new bridging anything, layer 2 anything. I'd expect more out of a chain that's been around this long. EOS is the same thing. Tezos is the same thing. You could say the same argument for any proof of stake coin. It just feels like they haven't done enough fundamentally yet so far. Flipping gears to technicals, this is Tron USD on the daily. And since 2018, there have been a series of consolidation patterns on Tron up until really 2021. I mean, it had an Adam and Eve here that broke down. It had an inverted head and shoulders consolidation that didn't break up effectively. Another inverted or rounded bottom, double bottom, inverted whatever that broke up effectively. Ascending triangle that broke up along with everything else in 2021. And then since February, March has just been in a range really along with everything else. Now currently this actually doesn't look as bad as everything else does on technicals. I don't look at Tron on really ever, but this actually looks pretty okay considering how the rest of the market looks. It's at the 200. Yeah, it's telling you death cross maybe soon. It doesn't look the most bullish, but it certainly looks less bearish than a lot of stuff out there. Certainly less bearish than most of DeFi. Most of DeFi is basically back at 5 cent equivalent for Tron. And that may be where Tron is headed if the entire market turns bearish. I'm certainly not going to go out there and buy Tron tomorrow, but you can see there's tons of support historically on Binance between 2 cents and 5 cents. It's 19th on market cap. We can talk about circulating supply. I didn't. We can talk about market cap. I'm not. I'm just looking at technicals. This could morph into a very similar Adam and Eve double top like it did in 2018 and then easily fall from there. But as it stands here, it looks okay. It looks okay. Cloud doesn't hate it. It is below the cloud. We do have red cloud, bearish TK cross. But for the most part, this doesn't look as bad as everything else. Maybe because it's not traded as much. I don't really have an answer as to why. Volume here is flat on Binance relative to where volume was even February, March. I don't know if it's just because nobody trades it. I have no idea, but the trend looks okay. Doesn't scream bullishness, doesn't scream bearishness. Against BTC, it's actually held relatively well since February, March in this flat area. Over multiple years, it's actually held against BTC relatively well. This is a altcoin after all. Most altcoins against BTC have died a horrible death, especially altcoins as old as anything 2017 and prior, but this is done okay. And ultimately, you want to watch this 280 to 300 sat level for breakout, because this may be a multi-year breakout into 2023, but I would definitely watch that level at 280. You can kind of see the support here that where it broke down from, and that is currently the resistance where it needs to break up from at that horizontal 280 to 320 sat level. Against ETH, though, it's a different story. Against ETH, it is definitely a continuous loser, has been since 2019. It's basically been in a continuous death cross since 2019. Brief attempt here earlier this year to break out of that and just was unsuccessful. And you could currently probably classify this as a descending triangle, maybe a falling wedge. Now, one of those is bearish, one of those is bullish, but I'm not going to bet on the side of bullishness when it's been bearish since 2019. I want a full bull cross, potentially back to 5,000 sats. Let's say in some parallel multiverse, metaverse, this thing actually pulls off a bullish Adam and Eve against ETH. Let's say it pulls off bullish inverted head and shoulders against BTC, multi-year, right? Then it's a different story. Then we can talk about bullishness. For a measure of strength against ETH, it's anything above 6,000 GUI or whatever you want to call it. But the expectation certainly here is not bullishness. We can say maybe there's a bull div here on RSI. We can say maybe this is a falling wedge, right? We can get optimistic if we want, but the reality is it just hasn't shown strength since 2019 against ETH, and really has done no better against BTC since the same period in 2019. So for 2022 and beyond, I want to see proof of stake chains like Tron become increasingly decentralized, move away from founders, figure out the supply stuff, add dApps, add users, add things people care about. Most of these proof of stake chains are just flavor of the week, flavor of the month. We're going to add whatever's popular. We saw it on Tezos with NFTs. We saw it with whoever company, Nike, Ubisoft with Tezos and NFTs. The list goes on and on and on. That's not going to end. But is that going to bring people to Tron or Tezos or EOS? Is that going to keep them there? Is that going to be bullish for the coin is the real question. So I'll leave you on those words to ponder. That's all I have for this one. Like, dislike, comment, share, subscribe, and happy trading.